We're continuing on in our series, Ancient Paths for Modern Pilgrims. Today we're going to look at Luke 9. Disciples have growing affections for Jesus. So we're trying to look at essential practices and heart stances of the disciple. And this is definitely an essential heart place for those who are following Jesus, that they have growing affections for Him. Without growing affections for Jesus, following Jesus is a tiresome exercise. In fact, without affections for Jesus, Christian discipleship is nothing more than religion. It's the keeping of principles and maxims and rules, devoid of a love relationship with God. And that is drudgerous and boring and monotonous. Jesus himself hates religion, and he did a lot of work to expose it. In the book of Revelation, he writes a letter. Jesus himself writes a letter to the church of Ephesus, and he says, you guys are doing great. You do a lot of good things. A lot of the instructions I gave, you put them into practice. You have really good doctrine. You're doing great as a church, except for one thing. You've lost your love for me. He says, return to that. Return to a growing affection for myself, because that's the heart of Christianity. It's the heart of following Jesus. You want to follow Jesus because you love Him, because you like Him. Jesus says, return to that. Return to a relationship with me where we actually like one another. And not necessarily some kind of effeminate bromance, where we put away the hunting rifles and the skis and everything fun, and we sit down and we talk about our feelings with Jesus. Or where you can only experience an affection for Him in a church service like this, where we're singing songs that tug at your heartstring, or when you're by yourself reading the Bible and praying and you're caught up in some kind of mystical spiritual rapture. Those things are good. And good if you experience them and if you're wired that way, but not all of us are. And they are by no means the fullest or best picture of what it means to have affections for Jesus. Ideally, you would have the best kind of friendship with Him, where He is someone you are convinced is involved in and interested in a lot of your life. Someone who is interested in having a benevolent influence in the day-to-day, moment-to-moment parts of your life. Someone who's shaping your life with you for good. A great instrument in having growing affections for Jesus is that awareness that He is involved, that He is interested in you. So that's what I want to look at today, is how deep Jesus' involvement goes in shaping your life for good. And I imagine that most of us would nod our heads at that thought. Yes, Jesus is, He cares about everything, even the smallest things. We would give a head nod in that direction. He won't let any of my hairs fall to the ground. Apparently He's let that happen for me already. But despite the nod of the head, I think most of us operate as if it isn't really true. That Jesus isn't super interested in all parts of our life. Maybe He's involved in Sunday morning, or in Tuesday night small group, or when I sit down and pray and I do my devotions, or when I do something particularly righteous. Then He's involved. He's interested in what I am doing. But the rest of the time we would question whether or not He is at all interested in what we're up to, especially when we're doing something selfish, like skiing or hunting or cooking dinner or Facebook creeping on our friends. Is He interested in what's going on when we're up to those things? Is God mostly indifferent to the religiously neutral activities we engage in? Or is His concern limited to that of a cosmic moral watchdog, frowning when you let a bad word slip out after you've burnt your finger on the stove? We have growing affections for people who are involved in and interested in our lives. Often, we have lots of contact with them. Those are the kinds of people that we have growing affections for. We do not have growing affections for someone who did something for us a long time ago, but that's where their involvement ends. We might have affections for that person, but probably not growing affections for that kind of a person. So is Jesus deeply involved in your life? Or is he just watching it from afar, sitting on his gilded throne and smiling or frowning, depending on how faithful you've been today? I read this last week in the news about Manmeet Bhullar, a 35-year-old man elected as a Calgary MLA. Not only is he a successful politician, he has a reputation for genuinely caring for people. These are the words of Jim Prentice, the former Premier of Alberta, about Manmeet. You really could not go anywhere in Alberta without being struck by the sense of admiration and affection and love that people in this province had for Manmeet as a political leader. This was a man who was in politics for all of the right reasons. Considering how people felt about Manmeet, it was all the more devastating and tragic then when Manmeet stopped his car on the side of the highway last Monday to help someone else who'd been caught up in a car crash and was struck by a semi-trailer that also lost control and killed. Somebody had rolled their car into the median. Manmeet was driving north on Highway 2, stopped his car, got out to help them, and that's when a semi-trailer lost control and killed him. Isn't it difficult to say that Jesus was deeply involved in and interested in Manmeet if he let something like that happen to him? Could we with confidence say that Jesus was there for him? And if it is suspect that Jesus is deeply involved, caring for Manmeet, how can we with any confidence say that he's involved in and interested in us? Manmeet is only one of thousands of people across the globe who succumb every day to the forces of disease and tragedy and hunger. Is Jesus involved in and interested in them? And they're dropping like flies. And heaven forbid that we attribute their unfortunate ends to some kind of self-righteous sense that they deserved it, that they were particularly bad, or they were for some reason out of God's good graces, and that's why death caught up with them. In the Gospels, Jesus himself referred to two first-century events, two first-century tragedies, and he asked the question, do you think that the people that died in these events were any worse off than you, or were for some reason out of God's good graces? And he said this, these are his words, do you think that these unfortunate people were worse sinners than everyone else because they suffered and they died the way they did? Do you think they were any more guilty than you are? I tell you, no. So we would be wrong to think that we go on living or continue in health because of anything to do with some kind of special status before God. God gives no guarantees of such things, both to Christians or non-Christians, both to good people or bad people. Jesus said this, God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. So being good doesn't mean he's going to treat you better, and being evil doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to treat you worse. Your behavior is no bargaining chip before God for a good life. So that brings us back to the question, is Jesus deeply interested in making our lives better, or is he not? A morning reading of the newspaper may bring that into some question. I want to read a story from the Gospels about Jesus that I think will bring his involvement, the depth of his involvement in every moment of our life into some clarity. It comes from Luke 9. And the story picks up where Jesus' ministry in northern Israel has come to an end. He's been spending time in the region called the Galilee. And now he says that he is going to go to Jerusalem with his disciples. And he starts talking about his imminent death Every few days, he starts to referring to the fact that he is going to die for his disciples and for the human race. He keeps talking about this, but everybody's kind of confused about it. And they don't really accept it either. Jesus, I don't think you're going to die. That doesn't make any sense. That's where Luke 9:51 picks up. Let's read it together. As the time approached for Jesus to be taken up to heaven, he resolutely set out for Jerusalem. So this time where Jesus will be taken up into heaven is a time when his earthly ministry will end. He is at this time somewhere around 33 years old. He's my age. And he knows that in a few weeks he's going to go to Jerusalem where he will die, where he will be killed. And he's going to be buried. And he's going to be raised to life 3 days later. And he's going to spend a little bit of time with his disciples, appearing to them after he's been raised. And then he is going to go up to heaven to be with the Father. So Jesus knows the timeline, and he knows that great suffering is in store for him in Jerusalem. But he turns toward that city with determination, with resolution. He sets out for Jerusalem, where he knows he will die for all peoples. That's why he said he came. So he's in Galilee at the time, in northern Israel. And Jerusalem is in the southern part of Israel. There's a little map for it. So is Galilee, so is Judea and Jerusalem in the south. And the fastest way to go from Galilee to Jerusalem, like any other point, would be to go on a straight line. Go straight there. But that's not what most Jews did. Most Jews walked around, as you can see. That's the path that most Jews would take. The earlier one there is they'd walk around and take a long road. The reason for that is this place called Samaria. In Samaria lived Samaritans, and Jews did not like Samaritans. They considered them half-breeds, religious infidels, and the Samaritans felt about as fondly for the Jews as the Jews did about them. So they avoided one another. They walked around one another. Jews wouldn't go into Samaria when traveling from Galilee to Judea. But that's not what Jesus does. Though being a Jew, he plans to go straight through Samaria in the hopes that he can officially meet the Samaritan people. He's been spending most of his time with the Jews, but he wants to meet with and stay with the Samaritan people on the way to Jerusalem. That's where we'll continue in verse 52. Jesus sent messengers on ahead of him who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was headed for Jerusalem. So Jesus must go to Jerusalem, and he set his face there resolutely, because that is where he will die. For Jews, for Samaritans, for Romans, and Egyptians, and Chinese, and Russians, and Americans, and Canadians. But the people in Samaria will not welcome him because he is heading for Jerusalem. Isn't that a little bit ironic? Jesus was committed to the Samaritans to the point of death. He's unconditionally committed to them, to their healing, to the point of giving his life for them. But because his destination is Jerusalem instead of Samaria, they will not welcome him, because he won't stay with them instead of going on to the place where he will die for them. If he would have turned aside from the only act that would have healed them and stayed in Samaria instead of going to Jerusalem, they would have welcomed him. If his destination was Samaria, they would have accepted him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. We could rephrase that sentence. The people there did not welcome him because he was categorically committed to their healing. Doesn't that sound ironic? And maybe just a little bit ignorant. Well, the ignorance doesn't stop there in this story. When the disciples James and John saw this, they asked, "Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to destroy them?" Whoa! What's up with that, man? Where did that come from? I mean, we know that the disciples are not the brightest beams in the sky at this point in the story, but fire from heaven, that's a little bit intense to destroy them. I mean, they've been hanging out with Jesus for a while now, and they've seen him heal and bless countless of people. Heal them from diseases, raise people back from the dead, forgive them for their sins, remove guilt from their life. And fire from heaven, that's not very nice at all. And we could totally condemn this kind of response, but you can get inside their heads a little bit, where they're coming from, why they might react this way. Here's Jesus, whom they know is God's anointed king. He's God in the flesh. And these people whom he made are going to turn him away at the door. No. That's not going to happen, Jesus. Let's call down fire from heaven and let them meet their maker after the fact. But Jesus turned and rebuked them. Then he and his disciples went to another village. Jesus says, no, I'm not doing that. Nobody's getting melted today. No fire's coming down to ruin anybody's lives today. We're just going to go on and stay in a different town where they will give us a bed for the night. So if this story is at all representative of how humankind's perspective on God's involvement in our lives, we would have to say this. We might be ignorant at any given moment to the level of grace that we are wallowing in. Jesus is walking, talking grace in the flesh. He's about to give his life to save the lives of other people who won't receive him because he won't end his journey in their town. They have no idea what he is really up to. They see about 1 inch below the surface and presume that he must not care for them if he doesn't stop in their town instead of Jerusalem. Not only is he going to die for their sins and their mistakes, but he's going to do it when they won't give a rip to take 2 seconds to listen to him describe what he is up to and how much he does care for them. That's ignorance. But it doesn't stop grace incarnated from loving them unconditionally. Ignorance doesn't stop talking grace from walking into death to save those very people. And then you got another set of people who know Jesus really well. They've seen him heal all these people. They've seen him forgive. They've seen him love. And they've seen him fight for the oppressed. And you'd think by now that they know that he's not into melting anybody. That's not why he's here. But they have the nerve to ask him to do just that. That's also just a little bit ignorant. But walking, talking grace doesn't stop calling them his closest friends and walking with them on a journey to the next village that will land in Jerusalem where he will die for them as well. So of all the players in this story, Jesus is the only one who is truly involved in and interested in the welfare and the good of everybody else. If they had their way, the Samaritans would have stopped him from dying for them. If they had their way, he would have been a passive participant in their destruction. If the disciples had their way, Jesus would have been an active participant in the Samaritans' destruction. And Jesus was the only one who was actually interested in everyone's good. So is it possible? Is it possible that our lives are like that? That we are bumbling around, liable to get into a huge amount of trouble at any given moment? That we're a walking liability to ourselves, to other people, and unbeknownst to us, walking, talking grace is walking there with us on a mission to save and protect us at the cost of his own skin. And once in a while, we're jabbing our fingers up to heaven, telling Jesus how bad he is messing our lives up. How we should get back on track and do the thing that we really need. Is it possible your life is at all like that? And if it is, and if you are able to see it clearly, would you have a growing affection for Jesus? Let's think again about the world and see if it's plausible that is the reality. Any human being's death is a tragedy that we mourn, especially those who are closest to us. But when one of us dies, is that enough to prove that Jesus doesn't care about the millions of the rest of us that go on living? Is man meets death enough to prove that Jesus wasn't deeply interested in his life? Isn't it true that for every one of the thousands of man meets that die every day, there are 100 millions of others who go on living despite all the forces in the world that are conspiring to kill them, despite the dangers all around them, even the ones that they themselves put themselves into? Some of you may remember that I used to own a motorcycle. I owned a motorcycle for 1 year before I slammed it into a deer at 100 kilometers an hour. Me and the deer and the motorcycle went for a rip down the pavement. I rolled like a barrel for about 50 yards down the highway, and I stood up and I walked away. Now get this, about an hour before that accident, I thought it would be a great idea to take my helmet off of my head. I was on a day trip with Corey Robinson and Steve LeBlanc, and we crossed the border into Montana. And as you know, in Montana, you don't have to wear a motorcycle helmet. So we thought it'd be awesome to remove the helmets and feel the wind in our hair. So we took them off, and we put those helmets on the back of Corey Robinson's bike. He has a little mechanism that you can strap your helmet to and have it on the back of your bike. And we went ripping along. All of a sudden, Corey wasn't there. Drove back. Corey stopped, and he's retrieving our helmets from the highway because the little mechanism failed. And he's like, "Oh, sorry, dude, like your helmet got all scraped up on the highway." I'm like, "Oh, that's a bummer. I guess I'll just put it on." Put my helmet back on. Keep riding. Going towards Libby, and I am wearing about the thinnest pants that I own at the time. They're these ripped up jeans. They look really cool, but they have pretty much no protective ability. I thought it'd be great to wear them for a motorcycle ride that day. As we continue on, we hit a thundercloud that's raining just in one particular spot. I stop, I get out, and I pull out these heavy, heavy canvas rain pants that I own. I put them on so I can stay dry. 10 minutes later, I hit that deer at 100 kilometers an hour. And I decide that I'm not going to use my brakes for some strange reason. I think it's going to be best just to swerve around this deer instead of braking, long before I hit it. So I decide I'm going to swerve. Deer decides he's going to swerve too. Unfortunately, we swerve in the same direction and connect. And me and the bike and the deer all go for a rip. And when I think about that day, it seems like I was working really, really hard to hurt myself. Let's take this helmet off. That's just not necessary. I'm going to wear some really thin pants, and I'm not really going to use my brakes. But someone else, I think, was conspiring against my own evil intentions to harm myself, to put my helmet back on, to get me to stop, to put on some heavier pants, and to make sure that nothing was in the way when I went rolling down the highway doing 100 kilometers an hour. And because of that, I walked away with a couple little marks on the back of my wrist. That's all I got from that accident. Yes, God could have removed the deer altogether, but the point is I was willing to put myself into harm's way, and I did that. I made some stupid decisions and did not pay for them, and the deer and the motorcycle did. And now I don't have a motorcycle, and maybe that's the way that it's supposed to be. Now think about it. How many times have you cheated death or come very close to dying or critical injury? How many times did someone blindly swing a golf club or a baseball bat and it skimmed by your head? How many times did a rock come tumbling down a mountain that you were hiking up and you ducked your head just in time so it went by? How many times were you texting while you're driving on the highway or fiddling around with the radio and you looked up just in time to miss a terrible, horrible accident? If you think back in your life, how many times? And here you are. I remember smashing my head on the cement many times as a child. I remember that feeling a lot when you get a good hard head bash against something really hard and you are reeling and everything is spinning. And little kids are like that. They're like walking piñatas for the hard things of this world. They are conspiring all the time to hurt themselves. Walking over to the top of the stairs and looking down like, rolling down here would be a really good time. I should try that out. I feel sick to my stomach every time I see 1 and 2 year olds approaching the stairs or going up and down them. I get sick. And I'm like, are you trying to put yourself in harm's way? Do you want to hurt yourself? And sometimes they do. And what is surprising is not that some of us end up casualties, but that so many of us make it to adulthood largely unscathed. Is grace there? Is He involved? Saving, protecting us from ourselves. A grace conspiring against all your hard work to put your own life in jeopardy. Scott Peck tells a story of a guy who came to him for therapy at the age of 35. He had met Peck and came in to get some help from what Peck called a mild neurotic issue. And this guy had never met his father because his father left before he was born. He was born to a mom in the slums of Chicago. She was deaf and also could not speak. Raised him to the best of her ability. Government decided that she couldn't do that very well, so they took him away from his mom at the age of 5 and put him in a foster home. He went through several foster homes where he did not get much love or safety. You know that kind of story. At 15, he experienced an aneurysm in his brain that left him partially paralyzed. At 16, he ventured out on his own to live by himself and predictably got involved with the law at the age of 17. He was jailed for a vicious assault. Spent 6 months there and was released. And the government got him a job as a clerk in a stockroom. And everything up to this everything in his life up to this point would lead us to believe that, at best, his story might be a mediocre one from here on out. At worst, probably completely self-destructive. But within 3 years, by the age of 21, this guy became the youngest department head in the history of the company. At 23, he left the company, he married another executive, started his own business, and became very, very successful and wealthy. At 35, he had become a loving father, a self-educated intellectual, a community leader, and an accomplished artist. And a reflection on his story, and many other stories that he saw like it, Scott Peck, the psychiatrist, said this: we know very well why people become mentally ill. What we don't understand is why people survive the traumas of their lives as well as they do. We know why certain people commit suicide. We don't know, under the ordinary concepts of causality, why certain others don't. All we can say is there is a force, the mechanisms of which we do not fully understand, that seems to operate routinely in most people to protect and to foster their mental health even under the most adverse conditions. According to Peck, it's not a wonder that some of us are psychotics. What is a wonder to him is that any of us are sane and in our right mind, given our upbringings. In fact, given our history as a human race, it is a wonder that any of us are alive at all. Human history is really a series of one moment of collective insanity to the next. The incident here with James and John wanting to bring down fire is not isolated in history, and it probably happens about as often as the sun rises. Last week is a good example. Turkey blows up a Russian bomber flying over their airspace. A bomber which is blowing up some rebels who are trying to blow up their despotic ruler, who is trying to blow up another group of people whose stated mission and purpose is in the name of God to blow up everyone else who is not like them. This kind of insanity is not rare for us. What's scary is that we now have the ability to do the job really, really well. We have the weapons in our warehouses to complete a holocaust of the human race. Isn't it remarkable that given the existence and abundance of nuclear weapons and all that's happened since we figured out how to make them, and the particular people who have been in charge of them, that we have only ever dropped 2 of them on other human beings. Every day, the United States and Russia have 1,800 nuclear warheads on high alert status, ready to be launched at a moment's notice with the push of a button. That is only a tenth of the total nuclear arsenal in the world. Don't you think it is a wonder that we never use those weapons? Every moment since the time of James and John to now, we have been on high alert to rain down fire on anyone who offends our sense of personal pride. Is it not a surprise? Not that we have gotten into worldwide conflicts, but that we are still standing here afterwards. Isn't it fairly obvious that walking, talking grace is still amongst us, turning us from our own madness? No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to rain down fire today. Go into your own homes. Go into your beds and go to sleep. For myself, I can't help but be affectionate to the one who protects me from myself, who turns aside the blows that I would inflict on my own body and mind and soul. How about you? Are you grateful to the one who keeps you safe despite all the forces, from microscopic bacteria to out-of-control asteroids which are constantly conspiring to end your existence? Are you ever grateful for the grace that holds back our hands so quickly raised against one another? Is your heart warm to the one who holds your own sin at bay? The sin that the Bible says is always crouching at your door, wanting to have you. Does it comfort you to know that there is someone who holds back your own darkness on a tight leash? The same person is the one who, in the midst of a flurry of human ignorance and rejection, took that very darkness on himself, who walked resolutely into our human madness. The fire came down on him, and his body was torn, and his mind was rendered. All our insanity was vented upon him until his body was spent and he was put underground. And he was raised to life so that you could know without a shadow of a doubt that he is very interested and very involved in every moment that you go on breathing. And he will still be involved, and he will still be interested when you stop breathing, because that won't be the end of his involvement with you. Sometime in the next 90 years, Jesus will withdraw his protecting, saving hand from all of us, but only so we can briefly walk through the door that he walked through for us and find on the other side that our affections for Jesus and his affections for us can be made full and complete. How could we not have growing affections for a king like that? Let's pray. Jesus, we can't always say that we love you, because it wouldn't always be true. But we can always say that you love us. So Lord, we long to rest in that and to know that the depth of your love for us. As you say in your word, that it's not love that we first loved you, but that you first loved us. Make us aware, Lord, of how much you love us and how interested you are in every part of our life and how close you walk with us. May that condition the way we interact with you and the way we walk forward in discipleship. In this new name.